Hello wrestling fans. Pro Wrestle Machine with a reading of the December 26, 1995 Observer. Let's see what Uncle Dave had to say. December 26, 1995 Observer Newsletter, Medusa throws belt in trash, Dan Severn wins Ultimate. USA Today viciously buries show. More by Observer staff. The wild Nitro vs. Raw Monday Night Wars produced another one of wrestling's most memorable moments when Deborah Michelli, formerly Alundra Blaze, came onto Nitro with the WWF Women's title belt and threw it in the garbage can. Calling herself Medusa and saying she's always been Medusa, she showed the belt and put it in a garbage can, saying that's what she thinks of the WWF and its women's title, calling the WWF by name. She said she was now in WCW, that she used to be Alundra Blaze in the WWF, and said she wanted to come to where the big boys play, and said it's also where the big girls play. The bombshell came on the heels of a week filled with rumors and signings. Michelli's WWF contract expired on December 13, and it was well known within the WWF that she was negotiating with WCW and her contract wasn't renewed, so technically she was fired. J.J. Dillon sent a letter in midweek to All Japan Women, canceling the Blaze vs. Asia Kong match that was scheduled for the Royal Rumble, saying that Blaze's contract was going to expire and not be renewed. This decision had to have been made several days earlier, as when Kong's squash match with Chaperta Asari aired on Raw on December 11, announcers Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler played it down and never once mentioned Blaze's name, which was a giveaway that the women's division was being abandoned. Several WWF wrestlers had been under the impression that Blaze was going to be dumped after the Rumble anyway, and we had heard several reports from Japan that Kong would be given the title in the January match. The WWF had negotiated with All Japan Women for Blaze to return to Japan as a regular in January and return to WWF for a few pay-per-view shows against Japanese women during the course of 1996. At the same time, she had begun talking with WCW. All Japan Women, coming off what happened leading to its wrestlers appearing on pay-per-view shows for both WWF and WCW, because of the manner each respective company dealt, or in the case of WCW, didn't deal with them, wants to keep its working arrangement with WWF, even though the women seem to get over much better in WCW. Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto may work WCW again because they are actually free agents rather than full-time AJW wrestlers. It had already been reported in Japanese newspapers earlier Monday that Medusa had signed with WCW, and that WCW and JWP had reached an agreement for a Medusa vs. Dynamite Kansai feud in the United States. However, Michelli's first television match is tentatively set to be in January against Reggie Bennett of AJW. Blaze wasn't the biggest name arriving with a new company over the weekend, but it was the biggest shock. Reports we received were that Vince McMahon, who found out about it from a technician early in the Raw show, was stunned to the point that's why he seemed so tired and distracted on the live show. The biggest name being bandied about was the Ultimate Warrior, in a very strange deal. On the syndicated Superstars show, at the end of the show they had Jim Ross hint that Warrior would be returning to WWF. However, it was never mentioned either on Action Zone, which is taped later in the week, nor on the December 17th In Your House pay-per-view show or the subsequent Raw show. We've been unable to get any confirmation on it other than the rumor mill among the WWF wrestlers was that Hellwig would be returning as a regular starting at the Royal Rumble, but nobody seemed to know for sure, and he wasn't backstage at the show despite all kinds of rumors going around that he was. It's possible he's coming in, or given his track record that he agreed to come in early in the week and the deal had already fallen through before it was broadcast, or even it's possible that WWF was following WCW's lead and teasing him at the last minute as a fake hotshot angle to get last-second curiosity for a pay-per-view show which on paper looked to need all the help it could get as far as drawing a buy rate. Among those who were backstage at the pay-per-view were Steve Austin, who debuted at the Raw tapings as the ringmaster and was given the $1 million belt using the sleeper as a finisher. In a funny moment, he started doing jumping jacks while wearing the belt and the belt fell off him. Jeff Jarrett, who returned at the pay-per-view and is already doing a program with Ahmed Johnson, Tom Pritchard, with blonde hair and a crew cut as the twin brother of Skip, who debuted in a non-pay-per-view match as Flip the Body Donna, so his ECW tenure appears to be short-lived. Buddy Landell, who debuted on the pay-per-view replacing Dean Douglas in doing a quickie squash to Johnson, also was given one television win to set up his losing a WWF title match to Bret Hart's sharpshooter at the Raw tapings. Glenn Ruth and Chaz Warrington, who were the headbangers in SMW, and lost a tag title match under hoods as the Spiders against the Smoking Guns on the Raw tapings as their former identity of the Spiders, and John Rickner, formerly Boo Bradley in SMW, debuting as Santa Claus, a heel Santa Claus who attacked Savio Vega on the same pay-per-view show. Even though so much of the new talent was former SMW talent, At this point, the wrestlers have been told that Jim Cornette has nothing to do with booking. We don't have weekend ratings available at press time, however, for December 18th. Nitro set its all-time record with a 2.7 rating and 4.0 share, headlined by Randy Savage defending the title against the Giant. Despite coming off a pay-per-view show and being live, Raw faltered to a 2.3 rating and a 3.4 share, while the Nitro replay did a 1.0. After 3 matches lasting a total of 49 minutes, Dan Severn emerged $150,000 richer, winning the most hyped mixed-style fighting tournament in American history, the Ultimate, on December 16 in Denver. Severn, the current NWA Pro Wrestling Champion, opened by defeating 6'8", 325-pound Paul Verlins in 101 with a neck crank. He then totally dominated crowd favorite Tank Abbott in a surprisingly one-sided 18-minute match, winning a unanimous decision so obvious that Abbott, in a great display of sportsmanship, opted out of Octagon and refused to return before the decision was even rendered. In the finals, Severn escaped a few close calls but largely controlled a 30-minute match against Oleg Toktarov, winning a unanimous decision. Severn, 37, whose payoff rivaled the biggest one-shot payoff any pro wrestler aside from Hulk Hogan and maybe a few others had ever received in the history of the pro wrestling business, earned from his loss to Ken Shamrock in July. This Severn was 100% prepared, trimmed down to 238 pounds with 8 weeks of the best consistent training he said he had ever had in his athletic career that goes back to being a teenage national wrestling and freestyle wrestling. Severn had trained and studied videotapes, preparing largely for Patrick Smith, Tank Abbott, and he figured on Marco Ruiz in the finals, although he was prepared for Toktarov. Severn's eyes were totally focused and confident going into every match, and his performance was a noticeable difference from the Shamrock match. While many were calling Ruiz the favorite 1 week before the event, the night before most predicted Severn to take it all, with the idea being that he would take less punishment from Abbott than the Ruiz-Toktarov winner would take from the loser, predictions that ended up being accurate. The day before the event, Severn found out his opponent in the first round was Verlins, a man much larger than Smith with totally different fighting techniques. He and his entourage did an all-night cram course in their hotel room, watching Verlins' videotapes to come up with a strategy to shut him down. The show came off as almost secondary to the incredible amount of media publicity, both locally and nationally, surrounding the event. The publicity was largely negative toward all involved. The fighters were insulted as barbarian palookas. The fans were insulted as the bloodthirsty lowest elements of humanity. The promoters were insulted as being sleazy and deceptive. Politician after politician, reporter after reporter, jumped on a bandwagon that snowballed into creating an illusion about an event, about the participants and about the fans that was nothing even close to what was going to transpire. But when the dust cleared, the face of the Ultimate Fight had changed once again. Ultimate Fight, with the introduction of judges' decisions and the domination of Severn, a man whose writing skill in wrestling was so strong that it negated most of the offensive tactics of his opponents, emerged looking far more like sport than the unrestrained violence many had portrayed it as. In many ways, it's tremendous ammunition for a debate. But what about for business? It also came off more like sport than any of its previous shows and incarnations from another companies. The question is, when it comes to the long-term popularity of the event, is that good or bad? It's a question that is more difficult to answer now than ever before. When it comes to survival of the genre, it is good in a sense that politicians don't try and ban sporting events, and this both looked like and its commentary portrayed it as just a different technical fighting form. But the question has to now be asked, something nobody knows the answer for, is what exactly is drawing most of the viewers? If the lure is unrestrained violence and the idea of watching a televised street fight, then you have the catch-22 that turned pro wrestling into what it is today. The most skilled fighters more often than not have the least entertaining fights because they are smart, cautious, and have great defensive skill. And skill, even at its best, can't match up to the lure explosive rage, even when in most cases it's illusory, when it comes to being a drawing card. Look at Mike Tyson. At the same time, when it comes to being a drawing card, in combat or work combat sports like pro wrestling, personality and name value usually greatly overshadow either skill or rage as drawing components. If the lure is to see a hybrid sport that has gained a lot of popularity with the public despite being largely shunned by the establishment, that would be another story. The fact is, kickboxing events, a basically foreign sport brought to America, where boxing has been the king, rarely do any numbers on pay-per-view. Submission wrestling or sport jiu-jitsu, the closest sport equivalents to the most recent UFC, have almost no popularity base whatsoever in this country. UFC revolutionized the martial arts world. It changed the way many people look at fighting. It is the closest thing to giving a definite and decisive answer to the age-old question of what would happen if a boxer fought a wrestler or a judo man fought a karate man. As wrestling people have long maintained, but not as boxing people and martial arts people have taught the public, generally it'll quickly go to the ground and the wrestler would win. But as only shoot wrestling and jiu-jitsu aficionados only knew a few years ago, classic wrestling skill in a true fight situation, as Jeff Blatnick aptly stated during the show, is a means to the end but not an end. Submissions are the end. But buys based on the curiosity of what would happen if you put a black belt karate guys in against a boxer are over. Ultimately, people are coming to see fights. And people who have watched all the UFCs have a very different idea of what a fight looks like than those who have only seen real fights in the movies or in their wildest imaginations. But will there be enough people once they know what a real fight looks like, at least among skilled practitioners, that will support a franchise like this on pay-per-view in 1996? Remember, in 1996, there will be at least two, and probably more, copycat organization formed to confuse the mix. And remember also, that even pro boxing, a far more established part of our culture, only really does big numbers on pay-per-view for a scant few marketable names. In every sport or pseudo-sport, the hardcore fans want to see the sport performed at its best. No sports, not baseball, not boxing, surely not pro wrestling, and not even football or basketball, can survive at anywhere near their current level if they limit their audience to the hardcore fan who knows the stats, the real nuances, and really has some genuine working knowledge of the inside of the professions. The crowd in Denver was very different from the previous UFC shows in Casper, Wyoming and Buffalo, New York. They came to see fights. And while what they saw may not have been exactly what they thought it would be, they were educated enough to enjoy it. The crowd heat and reactions were excellent, and the fans were far more into the matches than at any previous show. In Charlotte, a large percentage of the crowd didn't understand what Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie were doing. The people near ringside who bought the expensive tickets understood, and many found it fascinating, but the casual fan no doubt found it boring. There was booing every time they went to the ground. By Buffalo, when Shamrock fought Oleg Taktarov, people knew a little better and accepted it a little more, but still booed when they hit the ground, although not as much. In Denver, the crowd was totally appreciative of the mat work and didn't lose interest in any of the long fights at any point, although they were clearly unhappy with Marco Ruas' performance against Oleg Taktarov. The only real booing, aside from pre-match boos from the Tank Abbott fans directed at his opponent, were directed at Ruas in the closing minutes of the Taktarov match, because Ruas kept backing off and wouldn't go to the ground, resulting in a time limit draw with Taktarov winning a unanimous decision that was controversial only to Ruas and his Brazilian contingent, who kept protesting for the rest of the show, and the rest of the night after the show, claiming the judges were unqualified. Fans live understood what it was far more than at the previous shows and left on a high note despite 3 matches going the time limit, and gave both Severin and Taktarov big hands at the end. There was no booing because bouts were going the time limit, and the few catcalls from fans reminiscent from earlier shows were largely immediately shouted down. To UFC officials, that it has to be taken as a major positive sign that they have educated their audience. But despite more publicity than ever before in the weeks leading to the event and the toughest field of competitors to date, it doesn't appear the show will be the giant pay-per-view success many who thought the nationwide debate about banning something would turn it into. It appears in that vein similar to the Lawrence Taylor WrestleMania show. Although the day after the event is usually far too soon to get any kind of an accurate reading, Campbell McLaren of Semaphore Entertainment Group said it looked as though the show would fall short of a 1.0 buy rate. He blamed it on being the same night as the Tyson fight. I'd rather have gone up against the finals of the NBA playoffs. I definitely would have rather gone up against the World Series. At least a World Series game, but maybe not the final game, he said. This, going against a Tyson fight, was the worst case scenario. Semaphore Entertainment Group moved the event back so the Tyson fight would end before the regular pay-per-view would begin, so the events weren't going head-to-head. There was little doubt going in the Tyson fight was going to have a negative effect on the buy rate, but the question was how negative. Many felt all the publicity would more than offset the damage on bucking Tyson. He considered what the preliminary indications were as being okay but not great, and with the price raised to $24.95, it may draw more money than any previous UFC show, but will probably fall short of some of the recent events when it comes to total buys. The show drew a turnaway crowd of 2,800 at the Mammoth Events Center. A Joe Charles beat Scott Bessick Cancrace in 4:38 in what was actually the only back-and-forth match on the entire show. The two traded the advantage during the match before Charles won with a top wrist lock. Mark Hull beat Trent Jenkins in 5:29 when Jenkins tapped out after elbows and punches from on top. Jenkins, from Denver, was a last-minute sub for Verlins, who was moved into the tournament when Smith canceled. He managed to avoid being taken down for several minutes by hanging onto the cage, and the prelim match ref didn't call for a restart. Once Jenkins was forced to let go, it was quick work by Hall. Jenkins, after quitting, ran to the cage and went to leap over the cage, but didn't clear it and fell back in, before getting out of there and storming off. 1. Abbott beat Steve Jenham in 1:15 when Abbott took Jenham down and maneuvered him to the cage, and used a unique tactic of forcing his head into the cage with his neck twisted at a bad angle and using his own head to trap Jenham's head and put more pressure. Both men had trimmed down a lot from their previous appearances. Abbott was down from 280 to 250 because he felt conditioning was his only weakness, while Jenham was down from 210 to 190. 2. Severn beat Verlins in 101 with a neck crank. Severn took him down right away and put the pressure on. Verlins waited too long to tap and was laid out in the ring for a while after the match. 3. Toktarov, who was announced at 225 pounds but looked to be about 215, beat David Benetow in 1:15 with an ankle lock. Benetow trimmed down from 255 to an announced 235, but he looked more like 225, and was, according to those around him, the most aerobically fit he had ever been in his life. Benetow trained with famed boxing trainer Emmanuel Stewart and with a bodybuilding nutritionalist with the strategy to keep the fight on his feet and use boxing skills, but in fact, he didn't even get an opening to land a punch. All his conditioning work was for naught as Toktarov once again caught him in a quick trap. 4. Ruiz beat Keith Hackney in 2:43 with a choke. The only reason it took that long was because the two circled each other like boxers before Ruiz took him down and turned him. Ruiz pounded on him with punches to the back before choking him out. 5. Severn beat Abbott by a unanimous decision from the three judges after dominating him for the entire 18 minutes. Severn quickly took Abbott down and rode him, throwing punches, knees, palm blows, forearms and elbows on him while Abbott was down using his hands to cover up. Severn held him down and kept pounding him, but was unable to finish him. Abbott finally used the cage to pull himself to his feet and tried a few offensive moves at the end, although he was being totally controlled by Severn, and none were effective. He actually broke free in the last minute before hopping the fence before awaiting the obvious judge's decision. Abbott was the crowd favorite, and his most ardent supporters, a very rowdy group of stripper/biker types, all walked out when he was beaten. 6. Toktarov beat Ruiz via a unanimous decision in a less one-sided, but nearly actionless, disappointing match in 18 minutes. Ruiz opened Toktarov up when he got on top of him. Toktarov ended up catching Ruiz in a near choke, although Ruiz was locked up but wasn't in danger of submitting. Toktarov bled pretty bad. John McCarthy, seeing the extent of Toktarov's bleeding, ordered a restart to check the cut. The doctor ruled the cut wasn't bad and the match continued. Fans were really upset because they thought that it was going to be stopped as there was a decent amount of blood, but at the time Toktarov was in a dominant position. The rest of the match was mainly Ruiz dancing away from Toktarov, mainly throwing leg kicks, which Toktarov would answer. Toktarov went down once and Ruiz backed away. It appeared Ruiz wanted nothing to do with Toktarov on the ground and was even the least aggressive on the feet, where one would have thought he'd have the advantage. 7. Severn won a unanimous decision over Toktarov after a 27-minute match and 3-minute overtime period. Toktarov nearly won right away as he made the same move for the ankle that beat Benetow, and even though Severn knew it was coming and expected it, he came dangerously close to being locked 2 or maybe 3 times before getting away. Severn regrouped and got on top, but Toktarov was in the guard. Severn opened him with headbutts. After a restart, Severn took him down and started riding him. McCarthy called for another restart, and after some time on their feet, Severn took Toktarov down and began headbutting him. That was basically the story of the match, with Severn clearly dominant and the decision very clear-cut, even though Toktarov actually had the best near finish in the opening moments. This was a very good live show and an easy thumbs up from me from that aspect. The crowd, which was rowdier than a traditional pro wrestling crowd but not nearly as rowdy as an ECW crowd, for the most part seemed appreciative of the competitors. For those who wanted memorable knockouts or high spots, or even back and forth evenly fought matches, they didn't materialize. I noted complaints from readers who have grown used to submission finishes and were disappointed with winners chosen by judges, but the reality is that this tournament would have been an absolute disaster if it wasn't for the judges, as all 4 semifinalists would have been eliminated by the old rules that in a draw, both men are out. It was disappointing in the sense that all the matches in the tournament turned out to be one-sided and there were no toe-to-toe slugfests. Severn's combination of skills, strength and conditioning were far superior to the rest of the field. He also seemed to get a rep from this show as being unable to finish, although he finished Verlins right away, and nobody else has been able to finish Toktarov. Abbott, who was probably the group's biggest drawing card and people saw him as a badass monster, was exposed by Severn. Severn said after the matches that he expected going and that Abbott would be able to go the distance because he was so powerful and his strategy was to keep him off his feet, but said Toktarov was a tougher and more dangerous fighter. Although nothing is official, the probable future when it comes to pay-per-view events are, provided Shamrock beats Chemo in February, is for a Shamrock-Severn main event on the May pay-per-view. However, after all the training, Severn's immediate plans were to enjoy the win and the holidays and sift through the various doors this victory should open both here and in Japan. "I don't have any grudges," he said. "I had a life before UFC and I'll have a life after UFC. I'm just waiting to see what will materialize. Right now I just want to enjoy the holidays with my family." USA Today, in a front-page story by Andrea Stone on December 18, complete with a photo of Severn about to punch Toktarov, portrayed the event as being a bloodbath with the rowdy crowd in Denver loving it. Senator Roy Goodman called it an animalistic piece of subhuman behavior more akin to cockfighting than a human sport. But while calling the event gory, it admitted the worst actual injuries were a fractured hand, actually a broken knuckle by Scott Bessick in an alternates match, and a minor neck contusion by either Paul Verlins or Steve Jenham, both of whom appeared to be fine at the post-match party. Toktarov, as it becoming costume, bled a lot and needed a few stitches. Mark Hall, another alternate, received what was described as a minor break in the nasal cavity that didn't even need to be set to heal on its own. The article quoted Dr. Richard Istrico, the UFC's doctor who has been a boxing doctor for 18 years in New York, as saying the politicians who condemn UFC are totally misinformed and obviously haven't seen it, and said he's seen no acute head injuries and said that football is much more violent. Mayor Wellington Webb of Denver, who got all the way to Good Morning America and the Today Show to face off with UFC's Bob Marowitz, was quiet locally, although there were stories just about every day in the local media leading to the event. After the event was over, a largely jubilant crowd left the arena chanting 3 stars the mayor, and there were at least 2 banners with negative things directed at Webb. In the days leading to the event, Denver DA Bill Ritter contacted Semaphore Entertainment Group's lawyer, threatening that he would file felony assault charges against any combatant that injured another, which worried Jenham, an Omaha police officer, who thought such a charge filed against him could pose a risk to his career. A local medical group the day before the event asked to monitor it, claiming it didn't believe the promoter's offset claim that nobody had been seriously injured in a UFC event up to that point. The post-show media coverage in Denver wasn't nearly as negative as it had been leading up to the event. Bill Scanlon in the Rocky Mountain News reported the live crowd largely loved the event, and that fans pointed out to him that UFC wasn't as violent as street fighting, boxing, or the war in Bosnia. Scanlon wrote most of the matches resembled wrestling more than street fighting, wrestling spiced with knees to the throat and fists smashed into foreheads. Paul Hutchinson of the Denver Post, who wrote several articles during the week that were heavily criticized by UFC fans, particularly one about the press conference 2 days before the event which portrayed the fighters, promoters and hangers-on as a sleazy element invading one of the city's nicest hotels, said the matches resembled high school wrestling more than bar-room brawling. Sports columnist Mark Kisla criticized what he called politicians and bleeding hearts for making a controversy out of the show because he said it was no different from socially acceptable boxing, although he didn't come anywhere close to saying anything positive about the event, and the column was more critical of people who separated boxing and UFC, saying the two were basically the same thing. Another major pre-show controversy involved Smith, one of the scheduled combatants, who was to face Severn in the first round. The day before the event, Smith bowed out because he claimed a medical exam by a doctor at a local hospital revealed a high enzyme count. However, when UFC officials called to check, there was no such doctor by that name at that hospital. Smith was replaced by Verlins, who at 6'8", 325, he was announced at 300, but actually, unlike most combatants, he weighed more than he was announced at. With superior wrestling skill, figured to be a much more formidable competitor, although either would have been out of their league in with Severn on that night. Among the pro wrestling types in attendance at the UFC were Masami Ozaki, Pancrase president, Yoshiki Takahashi, Pancrase Guy Mr., Pancrase Koji Kiao Dojo, who is at this point scheduled for the May UFC pay-per-view show, Kiyoshi Tamura, UWFI, Sonny Ono and Mike Tenay, WCW sometime announcers, Terry Power, former All Japan Women who will be returning there in the spring and has been working as an actress in video action movies since leaving wrestling 2 years ago, along with the pro wrestlers affiliated with or competing in the show like Ken and Frank Shamrock with Bessick, and Geza Kallman Jr. with Severn. The Japanese newspapers on Monday called the Severn-Toktarov match was one of the most important matches in the history of pro wrestling because a pro wrestler came out the winner of the biggest and most competitive mixed competition tournament in history. The WWF's In Your House pay-per-view on December 17 from Hershey, Pennsylvania was like two different shows. The first show before a crowd of 7,289, no word on paid, at the Hershey Park Arena was almost a complete mess. One bad match after another. One bad segment after another. A total lack of crowd heat. It seemed like one was watching a dying company like the American Wrestling Alliance at the end, desperately throwing bad angle and bad character that you knew wasn't going to get over, just hoping that something would stick. Going into the main event, the show was in the toilet and was more memorable because the WWF for whatever reason decided against confiscating signs before the show, although a woman during the show did confiscate two signs during the early part of the main event, a Hogan Rules and the Bret Hart Family Disgrace sign. However, 2 minutes later, she returned and gave the fans their signs back, saying that, in the spirit of Christmas, here are your signs back. The ECW fans pretty much stole the show with poster after poster right in camera range during the entire show. Then came the main event with Bret Hart vs. Davey Boy Smith. The match was nothing short of fantastic, and featured the return to WWF of Heavy Juice by Hart. Announcer Vince McMahon, apparently in an effort to play both sides of the coin, ordered wide shots and apologized about the blood, I guess to placate the cable people who don't want blood on wrestling PPVs, while also trying to get over a rougher style because the old style just didn't cut it anymore. Hart's blood caused an ECW arena-like reaction of his hardcore. The finish of the show, complete with a post-show face-off with Undertaker and Diesel, was so good that I felt almost guilty giving a show with a main event that good a thumbs down. That probably explains the mixed reaction to the show in the poll, although many who voted thumbs up were very strong in that feeling, almost all citing the blood as the reason. Among the signs visible included, SMW RIP 1991-1995, 911 We're Hardcore, ECW Bret Hart, Marty Must Die, Gangsters Rule, Mikey Rules, Hogan, Oz Diesel Sucks, Hello ECW Fans, Read the Lariat and many more. There were attempts to get ECW chants going that were noticeable but not overwhelming on television until the early moments of the main event when the chant came off on television really strong. A. Savio Vega pinned Bob Backlund in a dark match that was said to be dreadful. 1/2 star. 1. Razor Ramon, Scott Hall and Marty Jannetty beat 1-2-3 Kid, Sean Waltman and Sid Aoudi in 12:22 when Ramon pinned Sid after a bulldog off the middle rope. Goldust watched the match at ringside and talked about how masculine Ramon was, and then gave Todd Pettingill a note, which turned into a love letter. This match was a disappointment as Jannetty's work has been slow and sluggish since returning and Sid was pretty bad. The match just didn't get going, although there was good heat for Ramon vs. Kid. 1 1/4 stars. At this point, to show a communications breakdown somewhere, ring announcer Manny Garcia announced coming from Knoxville, Tennessee, Nature Boy Buddy Riddell, so one would assume Landell was getting a new name and about to debut. Then Jerry Lawler cut him off and went to the ring for a surprise, which would surely be Landell, but it instead was Jeff Jarrett. Lawler gave Jarrett a plaque commemorating a gold CD and Jarrett announced he'd be in the Rumble. Jarrett got no pop at all. When the segment was over there were light cheers and light boos but no real reaction. Many have forgotten by now because of just how great the video and the Michaels match was that until the very end of his first WWF tenure, Jarrett was actually the least over wrestler in the company of all the guys who got a push. Jarrett did a good job but the segment didn't get much of a reaction. 2. Ahmed Johnson Tony Norris pinned Buddy Landell William Answer in 42 with the Tiger Driver, which is now called the Pearl River Plunge. Dean Douglas came out and said he was scratched from the show by the doctor with a bad back but was bringing in Landell as his replacement. Landell came out to Ric Flair's old WWF music. Landell jumped Johnson, who didn't sell anything. After the match, Johnson spanked Douglas with a paddle. Jerry Lawler then interviewed Johnson, and when Jarrett came back, he broke the plague over Johnson's head. Jarrett hit him several times with brutal chair shots and the two brawled to the back. Johnson didn't seem to know what to do because the brawl looked pretty bad. 3. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque, beat Henry Godwin, Mark Canterbury in the Arkansas Hog Pen match in 8:58. Hillbilly Jim, looking much older than the last time he was on WWF television, came out as surprise special ref and got a good reaction. He never could work but he had a lot of charisma. Both these guys worked hard but the idea was to work the match down to behind the ringside area and throw the opponent into the hog pen for the win. It made everything in the ring lack any meaning. Godwin heaved the slop bucket at Helmsley, who got out of the way and a ringside attendant took the brunt of it, blocking it from the fans. Helmsley then had some of the slop rubbed in his face. They worked their way to the pen and Godwin whipped Helmsley into the pen and tried to backflip him into the pen but Helmsley landed on the top. Helmsley delivered a cactus jack elbow off the pen onto the floor which was also covered with mats. They worked their way back to the ring, then back out again. Finish saw Godwin deliver his slop drop near the pen, then have Helmsley set up and went for a tackle, but Helmsley ducked and Godwin went into the pen and lost. Helmsley then got into a shoving contest with Jim, but Godwin came back and press slammed Helmsley, dropping him face first into the pen and then body slammed him into the pen. It was even more gross since Helmsley had a cut opened up in his back from taking a guard rail shot. Helmsley then slipped around doing a Bobby Heenan inside the pen, falling down time after time. 1 star. 4. Owen Hart beat Diesel Kevin Nash via DQ in 4:34 when Diesel shoved the ref after using the jackknife. After the match he used another jackknife. Hart did a great job of carrying this. 1.5 star. Ted DiBiase did an interview saying he could buy anyone. At about the same time, Savio Vega, who worked a dark match, was throwing WWF merchandise to the crowd along with Santa Claus. DiBiase told Vega he could buy him. The two started arguing when Santa jumped Vega and attacked him. You could see this coming a mile away, but for some reason I always enjoy Santa Claus angles. I guess because one of the best angles I ever saw was a Santa Claus angle in 1983 at Reunion Arena in Dallas during the Von Erichs Freebirds feud, where Doak Hendricks in his former life dressed up as Santa Claus, and when he turned on the Von Erichs, Bill Mercer questioned whether or not he was the real Santa Claus. DiBiase left with Santa when Vega ran from the ring and attacked him, pulling off his hat, wig and beard, revealing him to be John Rickner. The next night on Raw they gave his new ring name as Santa Claus. 5. Undertaker, Mark Calloway, beat King Mabel, Nelson Frazier Jr. in a casket match in 6:11. Mabel did a bunch of moves and Undertaker kept sitting up. Mo distracted Undertaker, allowing Mabel to use a belly-to-belly, a leg drop and a big splash. Mo went to put Undertaker in the casket but forgot to shut the lid. The two celebrated. Then as they went to shut the lid, Undertaker blocked it, got out of the casket and made the comeback. After a choke slam, Undertaker kicked Mabel into the casket. Mo attacked Undertaker, who didn't sell it. He choke slammed Mo and put him in the casket as well, grabbed the necklace, which was the remnants of the urn, to give him back his magical powers in 1996, and shut the lid. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as their previous pay-per-view match. 1.5 star. 6. Bret Hart retained the WWF title, pinning Davey Boy Smith in 21:09 with a lucha cradle move known as La Magistral or Dandana. Diana Smith came to ringside with Davey Boy. Diana was pushed hard on TV as rooting 100% for Davey Boy in this match rather than being torn between the two as in their 1992 SummerSlam Classic. It started slow but built into an excellent match. Among the new spots was Hart trying for a superplex, Smith blocking it and picking Hart up as a reversal and crotching him on the top rope. Hart hit his head on the steps and had his back rammed into the post and ended up juicing heavily. Smith used a pile driver and a headbutt off the top rope for near falls. After a bow and arrow, Hart reversed it and went for the sharpshooter, but Smith got out. The two traded near falls until Hart hit a plancha, tried for a second dive, but Smith caught him and power slammed him on the floor. Smith undid the mats around the ring and went to suplex Hart, but Hart reversed it and crotched Smith on the guardrail. Hart used a backbreaker and a superplex for near falls. Smith tried a rolling reverse, but Hart reversed it for a near fall, before using the Magistral to win. After the match, Smith left hugging his wife and walking out together, which certainly looked as though Smith is going to turn back to babyface. In the commentary in the closing minutes, they almost gave you the impression both were baby faces. 4.5 stars. It had already been announced that the WWF champion would defend at the Royal Rumble against Undertaker. Undertaker and Paul Bearer were doing an interview when Diesel came out and complained, saying he deserved the title shot, and the show went off the air with the two doing a face-to-mask stare down. The Goldust pinned Duke Dries. The match went too long and no had heat following the main event. Dud. See Smoking Guns and Hakushi and Barry Horowitz beat Yokozuna and Isaac Yankem and Skip and Flip, Tom Pritchard. 1 star. In an even more devastating story than the original piece in the New York Post on November 22, a Village Voice follow-up in the December 19 issue went into even greater details on the federal government's investigation of Marty Bergman, the husband of Titan lead defense attorney Laura Bravetti, in connection with his activities as they related to the trial of Vince McMahon in the summer of 1994. The story, entitled The Fixer, by William Bostone, painted Bergman as a combination journalist, private eye media manipulator and snitch with a reputation of finding dirt on people and selling the information to those who can use it, ranging from politicians to FBI agents to law firms, newspapers and TV news programs. According to the story, prosecutors are investigating Bergman's activities, probing whether they include witness tampering and obstruction of justice in the McMahon trial. Lawyers for both Bergman and Bravetti refused to cooperate with the story. It went into greater detail about the New York Observer's story planted by Bergman alleging wrongdoing by federal investigator Tony Valenti and NBC producer Len Tepper, both of whom were involved in separate McMahon investigations in 1993, and a second story just before the start of the McMahon trial alleging a sex scandal involving Sean O'Shea, who was the prosecutor in the trial, and the daughter of convicted felon Joseph Lugo that O'Shea had alleged dated and acted improperly in regard to the government investigation of the father. Justice Department investigations in regard to both allegations claimed both claims were unsubstantiated, but the timing was interesting since the allegations against O'Shea dated back more than 1 year but broke right on the eve of the trial. In addition, during the McMahon trial, Bergman contacted the attorney for Lugo saying he was producing a story for American Journal on the O'Shea/Lugo situation. During the trial, American Journal had a camera crew stalking O'Shea, ready to approach him about the alleged scandal as he came out of the courthouse. One afternoon, Diana Lugo accompanied the Journal cameraman, having agreed to be part of a videotaped confrontation with O'Shea right in the midst of the well-publicized trial. None of this materialized because they could never catch O'Shea leaving the courtroom. Bergman later arranged an interview with American Journal with the Lugos in Madrid, Spain, where Joseph Lugo was a federal fugitive having fled after being sentenced to jail on a financial fraud charge. Lugo is now a prisoner after, according to The Voice, an FBI source contacted the Bureau with information on where to find the fugitive in Spain. The FBI source who gave up Lugo? According to the story, Marty Bergman. Bergman also helped Journal in putting together a WWF puff piece after the trial which included McMahon doing his first television interview about the case. In notes obtained by The Voice on the hit piece on O'Shea, it possibly tied the McMahon case even closer to the story. There was a memo to double-check information on the story with Flood, believed to be a reference to John Flood, an investigator who worked with Bravetti on McMahon's defense. At the same time, Bravetti was fighting to keep secret several embarrassing items regarding McMahon's past, including court documents alleging a series of affairs with his secretaries and grand jury testimony, indicating he once told of snorting mountains of cocaine. Bergman's connection with Emily Feinberg, the main prosecution witness against McMahon, was alleged as Bergman claiming he was a producer for A Current Affair, and allegedly offering Feinberg $350,000 in return for a tell-all interview and work as a consultant in a movie Bergman claimed the Fox network was going to do about McMahon. Bergman continually was in contact with Feinberg's attorney, floating various money-making schemes which would require Feinberg to dish dirt on McMahon and the WWF. The story claimed the feds opened up the probe last year after officials in the Brooklyn prosecutor's office found out about Bergman's contact with Feinberg, his role in planting stories, and his relationship with Bravetti. The investigation centers around the idea of whether Bergman was attempting to get Feinberg to accept money for her knowledge of the McMahon case, thus tainting her testimony once the trial began. Bergman's lawyers claimed the story and investigation stems from government officials who they claim have a vendetta against Bravetti and Bergman. The story said that after Bergman had contacted Feinberg's lawyer in 1994, in the months after the indictment but leading up to the trial, Feinberg finally agreed to meet Bergman at Sparks Steakhouse. At the meeting, Bergman talked about being able to offer more than $300,000, and said that Fox wanted Sly Stallone to play McMahon in the apparently fabricated movie. Feinberg rebuffed many attempts to get her to take money for her story. During the conversations with Feinberg's lawyer, Bergman found out Michael Feinberg had drafted a book proposal about his days working for McMahon. The book was not meant as an expose of McMahon but as a comedy looking at the behind-the-scenes look at the WWF. Just before the trial, Bravetti subpoenaed the Feinbergs for any copies of any book proposals or outlines. However, Judge Jacob Mishler denied the request. Bravetti had an uncanny amount of ammunition about Feinberg in her trial cross-examination, brought up the proposed book during the trial while questioning Feinberg. At the same time, Bergman was contacting others with close knowledge of the case, claiming to be a 60 Minutes producer working on a piece investigating the WWF steroid scandal. This actually wasn't in the Voice story, but it was yet another hat he was wearing at the time, and at the same time served as a liaison between A Current Affair producer John Johnston and Jerry McDevitt, McMahon's other lead counsel. In addition, Bergman tracked down Feinberg for A Current Affair, giving the show information to surprise her when she was returning to her home after grocery shopping. The FBI subpoenaed Bergman during the trial, and when asked about the Observer piece, he allegedly lied, claiming he had no part in the story. The Hart family put together a tribute show to Stu Hart as a celebration of his life's work and the Stampede Wrestling territory, inviting many of the stars of Stu's Stampede Wrestling promotion back. By all accounts, the show was a major success, as much due to atmosphere as anything else. The show on December 15th in Calgary's Stampede Corral came off as a first-class event and brought together current stars from WWF and WCW along with several legends from the past. The show, however, was marred by disappointing no-shows. Dynamite Kid, the territory's biggest star and best wrestler in the late 70s and early 80s who parlayed Stampede Wrestling into almost legendary status in Japan, failed to show up, as did Abdullah the Butcher, both without ever calling to cancel. Kid agreed to come and wrestle on the show a week before the card, was sent a plane ticket from England where he is now living, never arrived and never called to cancel. Kid doesn't have a phone, so they had contacted him at his job where he works as a night watchman on a steel construction site, and they had tried calling that number but nobody answered. Finally, the day of the show, a coworker answered the phone and said that Kid wasn't coming. When Abdullah, who was the territory's top heel in the early 70s, failed to get off the plane he was scheduled to arrive on, his home was called and the person who answered apparently told one of the Hart's sons that he was someone who worked at the house and that Larry Shreve, Butcher's real name, wasn't home and was going to Canada. Archie Gouldy, Mongolian Stomper, also no-showed, but he called in advance about a week before the show because he had work commitments that he couldn't get out of. There was actually quite a bit of interest, including a newspaper article previewing the Stompers' match with the original Dan Kroffat because the two had such a major feud in 1973. Phil Lafond, All Japan Dan Kroffat, cancelled after injuring his back on December 9 in Tokyo, ironically in a match against Butcher and Giant Kimala II, and was also suffering from bronchitis. Dean Douglas also missed the show due to his back injury. However, both Brian Pillman and Chris Benoit from WCW joined WWF performers Bret and Owen Hart, Razor Ramon, Smith, 1-2-3 Kid and Rad Radford on the show. They had a Hall of Fame induction ceremony at the local Westward in that afternoon, with all inductees showing great affection for Stu Hart. Hart, shall we say, talked at length as the special honoree, dating all the way back to remembering his first learning wrestling at a YMCA in 1929. Among the guests was the premier, similar to Governor of Alberta, Ralph Klein, whose father was a pro wrestler for Stu under the name Killer Klein. The Hall of Fame was established to mark Hart turning 80 years old this past May, and to celebrate his 63 years of involvement in the sports of amateur and pro wrestling. Hart began promoting in Edmonton in 1948 and in Calgary in 1952. Those honored were wrestlers Abdullah the Butcher, Chris Benoit, Leo Burke, the late Larry Cameron, Cuban Assassin, Dynamite Kid, the late John Foley, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, George Gordienko, Archie Mongolian Stomper Gouldy, Bret Hart, Bruce Hart, Keith Hart, Hiroshi Hazy, Mr. Hito Torquemada, Dean Kiniski, Killer Kowalski, Dan Kroffat, the late Luther Lindsay, the late Earl McCready, Pat McGill, Dr. Bill Miller, the late Al Mills, Jerry Morrow, Angelo Mosca, Brian Pillman, Harley Race, Billy Robinson, the late Dave Roll, David Schultz, Alexander Scott, Mockin Singh, Davey Boy Smith, Stan Stasiak, the late Jack Taylor, Luthez, Leigh Thornton, the late Tiger Joe Tommaso, Waldo Von Erich, the late Whipper Watson, the late Jim Wright and Rube Wright, along with Stampede Wrestling promoters Mike Bullock, Bob Leonard, Al Oeming, longtime ring announcer Henry V. Ney and television announcer Ed Whalen. Stu Hart was a three-time Canadian national champion 1937, 1938, and 1939 in amateur wrestling, and also played in the Canadian Football League for the Edmonton Eskimos before beginning his pro career in 1945 after serving in the Canadian Navy during World War II. He held the U.S. title for Toots Mon in New York, got married to Helen Hart in 1947 and returned to Edmonton where he began promoting wrestling in 1948. But from all accounts, it was Terry Funk who stole the show. Wrestling in what he told friends may have been his final match in North America, Funk teamed with brother Dory to face Pillman and Bruce Hart, former Stampede Tag Champions, as Bad Company. The Double Juice Brawl went all over the building, including going through a table, ending with Terry Funk hitting the ref for a DQ finish. Complete results of the show that drew 4,700, approximately 3,900 paid were. The show opened with Ed Whalen and Kroffat introducing the crowd when Dr. Drago Zalvago, a manager/wrestler from the 80s, came out and threw salt in Kroffat's eyes. Aside from being the top babyface in the Stampede circuit around 1972 to 1973, Kroffat is best known internationally for coming to Los Angeles under the name King Crow, as the United National Champion, and losing the title on February 11, 1972, at Olympic Auditorium to Seiji Sakaguchi, which is the match which made it permanently a Japanese championship. The UN belt is now part of the Triple Crown in All Japan. 1. Cuban Assassin and Jerry Morrow, known as the Cuban Commandos in the mid-80s, beat King Lao, a local trainee, and Mike Anthony, Mike Lazansky, of All Japan Pro Wrestling in 10:30. Morrow is in poor health with stomach cancer. 2. Mockin Singh Mike Shaw aka Bastion Booger, pinned Gothic Warrior, local trainee Ed Gatesky with a Karachi Crunch, basically a running body block into the corner in 11 minutes of a poor match as Singh tried to give the newcomer spots, but he was so green he messed them all up. 2. Rhonda Singh WWF Bertha Faye, who went to high school with Bret Hart, pinned Casey Houston in 6 minutes. This match was ruined by a local TV sportscaster as ref who treated being in the ring as a joke and didn't even know to count pinfalls. 4. Benoit pinned Radford with a superplex. This match to WWF vs WCW performer, with Benoit the local star, going over. The match was said to have been the second best on the show, but marred because ref Wayne Hart counted 3 several minutes early and the two had saved their best stuff for later in the match. At some point during the day Radford was booked against Pillman, but Pillman didn't want to work with a WWF performer for political reasons, and also came in largely to team with Bruce Hart. Benoit, on the other hand, didn't care who he worked with. 5. Prophet, now 50, was scheduled for a match against Jesse Helton, whose father John was a star football player in the 70s and wrestled in the off-season. Just as it started, Zhiavago and Tor Kamata did a run-in, but Crawford made a comeback and put Zhiavago in the sleeper after running off Kamata, and then tore Zhiavago pants off. 6. 1-2-3 Kid pinned Keith Hart in what was said to be a good match. 7. Pillman and Bruce Hart beat Funks via DQ. 8. Ramon kept the IC title, beating Owen Hart. To avoid getting any significant cheers, Owen claimed he wasn't from Calgary because he was too good to come from a nothing-happening place like Calgary and too good to be a member of the Hart family. He apparently won the title at first. 1-2-3 Kid interfered, and while the ref was escorting him away, Hart hit Ramon with a mic and pinned him. A second ref ordered the match restarted, and Ramon got the pin with a razor's edge. 9. Bret Hart, bothered by a bad flu, pinned Davey Boy Smith to keep the WWF title in a match that was said to have been good but nothing special, by continuing to roll with a rolling reverse cradle. Both got huge reactions entering on Harleys. The final 2 matches were WWF style. Angelo Mosca, Moose Morowski, Yale Hayes, Leigh Thornton, Leo Burke, Gama Singh and many others were also at the show. The show is expected to air as a television special in both Calgary and Edmonton. A video won't be released of the show due to WWF and WCW not allowing their contract performers to be involved in a video. Jushin Liger captured the second Super J Cup on December 13 before a sellout 11,500 fans at Tokyo Sumo Hall for a show sold out several days in advance. Liger pinned Wars Ghetto in 1547 with a Fisherman Buster to win the championship match of a tournament that involved wrestlers from 7 different Japanese promotions. The show was described as being very good, with virtually every match on the card good, but it was also said to have not been near the level of the first J Cup show in April of 1994, won by Wild Pegasus. Most accounts were that the best match on the show was a non-tournament match where Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Psicosis in 9:39. Both men received 2 standing ovations after the match and fans threw money into the ring. The match took place between the semifinals and the championship match. The best tournament matches were said to be the finals, and the semifinal were Ultimo Dragon, who put the tournament together, put Liger over in the longest match on the show, lasting 17-19 when Liger reversed Dragon's attempted La Magistral into an inside cradle. In the first round, Grand Naniwa Michinoku pinned Damien, FMW/AAA in 6:36 with a Hurricane Rana. Shinjiro Otani, New Japan, beat Masaki Mochizuki, Kao Dojo, in 4 minutes with a knee-lock submission. Ultimo Dragon, War/EMLL, pinned Shoichi Funaki with La Magistral in 6:52. Gedo beat Masayoshi Motegi. Wrestle Dream Factory in 6:56 with a War special submission. Das Karas, EMLL/Michinoku, pinned El Samurai New Japan, in 7 minutes with a flying body press and Lionheart. EMLL/War, pinned Hanzo Nakajima Michinoku, in 6:48 after a moonsault. Second round results saw Liger pinned Naniwa in 9:13 with a Fisherman Buster, Dragon pinned Otani in 13:30 with La Magistral, Gedo pinned Das Karas in 8:54 with the Gedo Clutch in a major upset, and Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit, pinned Lionheart in 13:43 with a Tombstone piledriver off the middle rope. In the semis, Liger pinned Dragon with a small package in 17:19 and Gedo pinned last year's winner, Pegasus, in 9:20 with a headbutt off the top rope. EMLL. Dr. Wagner Jr. ended Atlanta's nearly 2-year reign as CMLL light heavyweight champ, beating him on December 17 at Arena Coliseo. There is apparently a promotional split between Juan Herrera, CMLL, and Paco Alonso, EMLL. Herrera has contacted Antonio Pena about getting back together, and has also contacted TV Azteca in Mexico City about getting a television show. Carlos Maines of UWA, who is also trying to work with Pena by having the AAA run its shows at the UWA arenas as they can make more renting the buildings out to AAA than they can running shows on their own, has gotten in the middle, claiming to Pena that the Herrera/Alonso split is a work and that they are attempting to destroy Pena from within. The year-end spectacular took place on December 15 at Arena Mexico, headlined by Shocker beat Cajos in a mask versus mask match on top. Shocker's father El Pato Soria was a star in the 60s and 70s in Guadalajara and seconded his son without interfering and was part of the big post-match celebration. Cajos was unmasked as Leonel Hernandez, 44, who has been wrestling for 16 years. His 16-year-old son unmasked him in the ring. No word on the crowd, but it appeared from television to be in the 6,000 to 7,000 range. The semifinal saw Hector Garza beat El Satanico by submission in the third fall in their hair versus hair match. Ref Rafael Gonzalez, who had DQ'd Garza the previous 2 weeks against Satanico for fake fouls, showed up to ref, which caused the crowd to go crazy, and they got a big pop when Roberto Rangel replaced him as ref. Several times during the match Satanico faked fouls, but the ref refused to call them. The match was too quick, so it wasn't as good as it could have been. In addition, Apollo Dantes retained the CMLL heavyweight title, beating Vampiro with a figure 4 in the third fall. The other major match on the show was for La Copa de Ultra Rendimiento, which basically means the Cup of High-Class Submissions. It was an elimination match where the only way to be eliminated was via submission, with Pantera and Silver King and Dandy and El Texano facing Felino and Negro Casas, and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Emilio Charles Jr. It came down to Silver King facing his brother, Wagner Jr., with Wagner Jr. scoring a pin. For some reason, the final singles match didn't have to be by submission after a Tiger Driver, and this was said to have been in the 4 stars range. I saw the Santo Casas match from December 1st on television, and it was in the 3.5 stars range. It was very smooth wrestling, and excellent old style, but it lacked the spectacularness of the top Mexican matches of the past year. December 15th was the final Arena Mexico show until probably February, as they usually use January to rebuild, running smaller Friday night shows at Arena Coliseo. Vampiro beat Pirata Morgan in a hair versus hair match on December 10th in Azcapotzalco. December 22nd at Arena Coliseo has Dos Caras and Liz Mark and Shocker versus Dr. Wagner Jr. and Cajos and Charles plus Silver King and Dandy and La Fiera versus Black Panther and Felino and Casas. AAA. The next show in the United States will be January 20th in Chicago at the Amphitheater, with the lineup tentatively set for Conan and Pero Aguayo versus Cactus Jack and Sabu, with Terry Funk as their manager, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Pero Aguayo Jr. versus Psicosis, and Juventud Guerrero Louisiana Parka and Octagon, and Tinieblas Jr. versus Pentagon and Pierroth Jr. and Cibernetico. Winners and Super Colo and Volador and Torero versus Jerry Estrada and Picudo and Damien and Halloween plus Sandman will defend the ECW title on the show. AAA ran head-to-head with the big MLL show and wound up with Pero Aguayo regaining the WWA heavyweight title, beating Cibernetico before 3,000 fans at Juan de la Barrera Gym. The title switch, believe it or not, wasn't planned. The crowd was going so wild when Psicosis used the Sabu Arabian facebuster interfering on Aguayo that Pena came out and decided to have the ref call for a DQ to quell things down, which resulted in a title change. The biggest news was the debut of Connect. It was scheduled as CN Cars and Pierroth Jr. and Pentagon and Mystery Partner versus Conan and La Parka and Octagon and Mystery Partner. The original plan was for Fishman and Ultimo Dragon to be the Mystery Partners. However, after returning from the J-Cup in Japan, Pena had a meeting with Connect, who agreed to come in. Dragon's debut fell through for the same reason all his proposed jumps have, and that is because EMLL has his foreigner working permits and he hasn't been able to get the paperwork to allow him to work for a new company. Halcón Dorado Jr. ended up working the match. Conan and Enek once again had problems. The two worked very tight with each other but weren't shooting, then began arguing with each other. This was the beginning of shooting, until Parka pulled Conan away. Conan then walked out of the match, but came back and the two worked together after that. After the match, they had words in the dressing room and Pena had to break things up. Both told Pena they didn't want to work with each other again. Connect said he still wanted to work within AAA but refused to work against Conan. Conan said he didn't want Connect around. After all the heels turned on CN Cars during the match, Cars wound up shaking Conan's hand when Conan made the save for him, but when Conan went to hug Cars shoved him away and walked off. The faces were DQ'd, but after the match, all the heels turned on Cars. The Aguayo Cibernetico title switch was saved through tons of outside interference. First Psicosis and Rey Mysterio Jr. were at ringside, and later Pero Aguayo Jr. came out, which brought out Jerry Estrada and Picudo. The world title match turned into a 4-on-3 with lots of chair shots. When the heels took over, fans began pelting the ring until finally ref Pepe Casas had enough and disqualified Cibernetico in the third fall, awarding Aguayo the title. They also did a DQ third from the top when heels Estrada and Picudo and Villano 4 used chair shots to the Neon Aguayo Jr., who teamed with Latin Lover and Heavy Metal. The other key match, which was said to have been spectacular, had Rey Mysterio Jr. and Thunderbird and Venombat Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera and Pero Silva. They apparently did everything under the sun in this match. All the local newspapers played up big the Antonio Inoki show in Los Angeles, with Pena saying he had no problem sending his wrestlers to work on a show in which MLL would also be sending talent. AAA is desperately looking for anyone who has a videotape of the most recent Los Angeles show, which wasn't taped, particularly the main event, since it was no while that they want to use some footage. Because of the tag team and trios champions being a mess because members are working for different offices, due to Fuerza Guerrera and Blue Panther leaving AAA, there has been talk in the papers of having Promel get the trios belts and Guerrera and Panther would team with El Signo as champs. Psicosis formerly held the belt, and in return AAA would get the tag titles and Psicosis, replacing Fuerza, and Juventud Guerrera would get those belts. They are doing some sort of a work angle where Pero Aguayo Jr. is going to take time off. However, they're going to do something with Picudo and Jerry Estrada to bring him back quickly. Picudo and Estrada are going to get a major push as a heel tag team. Televisa has cut way back on support in 1996 due to the latest peso plunge, so most of the television tapings are going to be done in the Mexico City area to save on travel costs. The first tapings of the new year will be on January 5th. Cien Caras and Octagon and Mascara Sagrada vs. Cibernetico and Pentagon and Pierroth. And January 6th, Conan and Parca and Tinieblas Jr. vs. Villanos, in the Mexico City area. The next Tijuana is December 25th with Pierroth vs. Parca, Conan and Tinieblas Jr. and Heavy Metal vs. Killer and KGB and Estrada, and a barbed wire match with Ultraman and Leon Negro vs. Psicosis and Halloween. The December 3rd El Toreo show aired on December 17th, and was said to have been an awesome 2-hour television show. All Japan. The January tour, which traditionally is a low-key tour, had some matches announced this past week. The tour will feature the Asunaro Cup tournament for younger wrestlers, with Takao Mori, Kamon Honda, Satoru Asako, Masao Inoue, Ryukaku Izumida, Kentaro Shiga, and Monokia Mossman. The tournament takes place during the month of January and ends on January 28th at Korakuen Hall. They have the traditional heavyweight battle royal on January 2nd at Korakuen Hall and will be holding a junior heavyweight battle royal on January 3rd at Korakuen Hall. They are also giving the younger wrestlers rare singles main events during the tour against the established stars. For example, on January 8th, Omori faces Stan Hansen and Izumida faces Johnny Ace, and on January 10th in Hakodate, Mitsuharu Misawa faces Jun Akiyama. Another special event is January 15th at Korakuen Hall, where because it is Mossman's 20th birthday, he's teaming with Giant Baba and Izumida against Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa. On January 22nd in Osaka they have an Elimination Rules tag match with Shiga and Asako and Kena Kobashi and Misawa versus the Patriot and Johnny Ace and the Eagle, Jackie Fulton, and the Lacrosse, Jungle Jim Steele. The main event for the January 20th Korakuen Hall show is Hansen and Gary Albright versus Misawa and Akiyama. Title matches on the tour are January 12th in Takamatsu with Ogawa defending the junior title against Rex King, January 24th in Matsumoto with Toshiaki Kawada and Tao defending the tag team titles against Hansen and Albright, and they'll also have 2 Asia tag team title matches. On January 27th, Akiyama and Omori defend against Eagle and Lacrosse, and the winners of that match on January 28th face the winners of a match on January 26th with Izumida and Honda versus Kikuchi and Ogawa. The December 10th television show with the tag team tournament finals drew a 2.9 rating. New Japan. Pretty slow this week, with the biggest news that Yoji Anjo will have a match on a January 27th shootboxing, a Japanese legit sport consisting of stand-up fighting in which boxing, kickboxing and wrestling or judo throws are all legal, but after a takedown, they are put back on their feet so no mat work is involved, against an American named Gibson. I don't know his first name, although there was a UFC fighter in Casper, Wyoming in the alternates named He-Man Gibson. December 9th television show did a 1.7 rating. Other Japan notes. Tokyo Sports announced its wrestling awards, which are very political in nature as they try and spread them around to cover all the promotions. Keiji Muto was named Wrestler of the Year, Misawa and Kobashi vs. Kawada and Tao on June 9th at Budokan Hall was named Match of the Year, Masa Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan were named Tag Team of the Year, Akira Tao was named Most Outstanding Wrestler, Hiromichi Fuyuki got the Fighting Spirit Award, Yoji Anjo got the Best Technical Wrestler Award, Masato Tanaka, FMW and Daisuke Ikeda, PWFG tied for Rookie of the Year, and Shinobu Kondori was named Woman Wrestler of the Year, and the October 9th Tokyo Dome was named Card of the Year. For political reasons, nothing on the April 2nd Tokyo Dome ever happened in the eyes of Tokyo Sports because the show was put on by a rival media outlet. All Japan Women also announced its awards this past week. Manami Toyota was named Wrestler of the Year, Takako Inoue and Kyoko Inoue were Tag Team of the Year, Inus vs. Toyota and Saki Hasegawa on August 30th in Osaka was named Tag Match of the Year, and Toyota vs. Akira Hokuto on September 2nd was named Singles Match of the Year. Besides the Super J Cup, the biggest show of the week was Pancrase on December 14th in Sapporo before 4,860 fans. It wasn't considered a major show, although the main event was a surprise in that champion Boss Rutan took 27-35 before catching Ryushi Yanagisawa in the choke sleeper. Ken Shamrock beat Katsumi Inagaki and Frank Shamrock beat Vernon White, while in a strange result, Dai Mesger went to a no contest with Minoru Suzuki. Mesger apparently really took it to Suzuki but inadvertently kicked him low and they stopped the match. It was announced after the show that the winner of the Rutan Frank Shamrock title match on January 20th will defend against Suzuki at Budokan Hall in May. In what sounds like an angle, Shark Tsuchiya of FMW disappeared after the first night of the tour on December 10th at Korakuen Hall, where she lost the women's title to Combat Toyota. After no-showing every card the past week, it was said that if she doesn't show up for her December 22nd barbed wire match with Megumi Kudo at Korakuen Hall, that she'll be fired. FMW high-flying wrestler Gekko is former War wrestler Masao Orihara under the hood. LLPW announced on December 18th that they will be holding a second-length UFC for Women tournament sometime in 1996, probably in the fall. Michinoku Pro drew a sellout 2050 at the Rinkai Sports Center in Osaka for a mixed tag match with Super Delphin and Grand Naniwa and Saki Hasegawa beating Great Sasuke and Kendo and Mima Shimoda in 25-37 when Delphin pinned Kendo. In this match, the women did spots with the men including Hasegawa doing a DDT on the floor on Sasuke, and following it up by hitting him with a dive over the top rope with a full flip. Lots of turmoil in EVA. Booker Victor Quiñones and the ownership of the company are at odds as the ownership wants to rely more on Japanese wrestlers than the foreign wrestlers. The next tour is January 2nd to 1/15 with the big item on the tour Cactus Jack working as a face since his split up with Tiger Jeet Singh in the NWA Tag Tourney final match. On January 2nd at Korakuen Hall, Jack and Shoji Nakamaki face the Headhunters. Jack and Nakamaki also have matches against NWA Tag Champs Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke. And on the final night of the tour they face a mystery team, which is strongly expected to be Tiger Jeet Singh and Umanosuke Ueda. I can't even believe Ueda is still being used in Japan. The new women's group JD, also called Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling, debuts with shows on December 24th and December 25th in Osaka. On December 24th, Bison Kimura and Chikako Shiratori face Bull Nakano and Kuga, a masked woman who is believed to be a former AJW wrestler who retired many years ago. Also Lola Gonzalez defends the TWF title against Jaguar Yokota. The second night is Kimura vs. Kuga and Yokota and Esther Moreno vs. Nakano and Gonzalez. I guess by those lineups, that tells everyone how long Nakano is staying out of action after tearing up her knee on November/27 in Salem, Virginia. AJW announced for January 3rd at Korakuen Hall it'll be Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue vs. Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito, Asia Kong and Mima Shimoda vs. Yumiko Hata and Atsuko Mita, Saki Hasegawa vs. Tomoko Watanabe and a Japanese tag title match with Ri Tamada and Kumiko Makawa defending against Yoshiko Tamura and Nobu Endo. On January 4th, Kyoko and Watanabe vs. Kong and Ito, Toyota vs. Tamada, Hasegawa vs. Tashio Yamada and Hata and Shimoda vs. Takako Inoue and Mita. The biggest show in January will be January 22nd at Ota Ward Gym with Toyota defending the WWWA title against Hata, Akira Hokuto and Shimoda defending the tag titles against the Inus, Hasegawa vs. Nakano, and Reggie Bennett vs. Watanabe. USWA. Jeff Jarrett won the unified title from Ahmed Johnson on December 20th in Tunica, Mississippi with an inside cradle. Both worked as babyfaces in the match. After the second straight week of drawing in the range of 450 fans in Memphis on December 11th, they are trying Wednesday again on December 27th and bringing back Jimmy Valiant for his usual Christmas week appearance. The Bob Armstrong/SMW part control angle was ditched after the Bad Houses, with them announcing that a judge overruled the first judge's decision saying Armstrong's claim to half control had no merit, and it was announced that USWA was totally in control and that Armstrong was banned from the television studio. Randy Hales then announced there would be no more of the stupid matchmaking like they've had the last 2 weeks, and he was back making the matches, and the first match he was going to make was Bob Armstrong against Jeff Jarrett with all the USWA babyfaces around the ring with belts. He also announced a match with USWA ref Frank Morrell against heel ref Gene Johnson, with the loser having to quit refereeing in the territory, and that he had Doug Gilbert and a mystery partner, who turned out to be Tommy Rich, against Tracy Smothers and Jesse James Armstrong for the latter's USWA tag titles and said that they were bringing back the PG-13 vs. Rock and Roll Express feud that produced great matches a few months back. Rock and Roll Express may be a short-term deal, as Robert Gibson has been telling independent promoters that he's retiring from wrestling and moving back to Pensacola, and he and Morton will be together only through the first week of January. Later on the December 16th TV show, they had a USWA title match where Brian Christopher regained the strap, beating Tex Slazenger. Downtown Bruno tripped Christopher, leading to Slazenger getting a chain, which he used, but Christopher kicked out. As Slazenger argued with the ref about a slow count, Christopher cradled him. The win gave Christopher a unified title shot at Jarrett on December 27th, which some think Jarrett will turn heel in. Valiant is returning in a match where Randy Hales puts up his hair against the hair of Smoky Mountain Massacre, with Valiant representing Hales in the match. In addition, Jerry Lawler returns from his broken leg for a SMW title match with Brad Armstrong. Hales is legit back as matchmaker. Jerry Jarrett tried to put his hand in to revive attendance for a few weeks, but it didn't work out. Bob Armstrong did an interview by telephone with Lance Russell, which ended up with Russell hanging up on him. Scott Bowden returned as a manager and brought out a crutch for Lawler. Bowden wound up with all the guys that were being managed by Bruno, so perhaps they'll do a manager feud once again with Bruno going face. Lawler came out and said that Bowden had returned from Planet Nerdo and kept calling him the Nerd Man. Bowden then hit Lawler in the thigh with the crutch. Bowden kept as far away from Lawler's injured shin bone as possible. Bowden then had a confrontation with Doug Gilbert, where Gilbert said Bowden was a college student at Memphis State, which he was last year, and Bowden said he didn't go to college in Memphis. He went to Florida State, where his uncle Bobby got him a scholarship. He said that Gilbert's tag team partner, Rich, was in rehab, and Smothers and Jesse James Armstrong then attacked Gilbert until Santa Claus did a run-in, making the save, and naturally revealing himself to be Rich. ECW. The only match announced for the January 5th show is Sandman vs. Conan for the ECW title, which will be Conan's final ECW appearance before going to WCW. Paul Heyman and Conan talked, with Conan agreeing to continue to send AAA talent to ECW, with Rey Mysterio Jr. appearing in a six-man tag on the same show. Steve Austin did an unbelievable interview on the December 19th show, saying how he spent 4 years waiting for a world title shot, then got 2 in 2 weeks and lost them both, and admitted he came into ECW out of shape, that he didn't rehab his arm, and said if he was smart he'd call up Eric Bischoff and tell him he deserved to win Announcer of the Year and kiss his ass to get his job back so he could sit around and get a big paycheck. He said he was disgusted with his career over the past 4 years. The Bruce brothers are expected to be headed in soon, while the Headhunters have agreed to start on January 26th and have 14 dates booked a year following that. Most expect the Christmas week show in Queens to draw the largest crowd in the history of the company. Paul Heyman is working hard on getting celebrities to attend. FMW's Koji Nakagawa is booked on the December 30th show in Reading, Pennsylvania. Here and there. Ottowan's biggest show of the year, the annual Eurocatch Festival on December 16th in Bremen, Germany, drew 3,500 fans, but only 2,000 were paid. In the main event, Ludwig Borga, Tony Halme, captured the CWA heavyweight title from Rambo, while Great Muta kept the IWGP heavyweight title, pinning Jim Neidhart in a bad match. David Finlay retained the CWA middleweight title, beating Franz Schumann in a good match. Tony St. Clair and August Smile beat Cannonball Grizzly and John Hawk to win the CWA tag titles, and also working underneath included Two Cold Scorpio, Big Titan and JoJo Lee. Satoshi Kojima. Ice Train won the Bremen tournament that ended a few days earlier. Dennis Coralluzzo is putting on several activities in conjunction with his Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl on February 3rd. He's got a luncheon scheduled that day at Garden State Park in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a mini convention at the Cherry Hill National Guard Armory, and a show that night. The entire Gilbert family is being brought in for the show. Incredibly Strange Wrestling returns to the Trocadero in San Francisco on December 23rd. Among the wrestlers scheduled to debut on that show are Santa Claus, wearing a silver mask, and the Firestarter from Paul E., Pennsylvania. ISW promoter Johnny Legend also did a bit on a Maywood, California promotion called the Iowa, where he beat Cheryl Russo to win the group's women's title, claiming to be the first man ever to hold a women's wrestling title. Eastern Wrestling Alliance on January 26th in Lincoln Park, New Jersey at the PAL building has Jimmy Snuka vs. Mike Sharp, Jim Powers vs. Skull Von Crust plus Johnny Gunn, Devin Storm, Tommy Cairo and more. John Gold is booking Kamala for personal appearances. For info, contact him at 908-354-4005. Heartland Wrestling Association on January 5th in Fort Wright, Kentucky has Bobby Blaze, D. Low Brown and Headbangers. Slammers Wrestling Gym is running a show on January 4th at Strongbow Stadium in Bakersfield, California. December 30th at Imaginations in Yardsville, New Jersey has Sabu vs. Devon Storm. UFC. Besides the Ken Shamrock vs. Chemo match on the 2/16 pay-per-view show from San Juan, Puerto Rico, the undercard tournament is being billed as technique versus tonnage, with smaller skilled guys taking on bigger guys. Confirmed in the tournament are Joel Sutton, who is 2-0 in alternate matches, Paul Verlins, Jose Moreira, a Brazilian who is one of Rorion Gracie's top protégés, and Paul Herrera, who is Tank Abbott's corner man and a former wrestler at Iowa. Abbott will be in Herrera's corner on the show. We received phone calls from Detroit, Los Angeles, and Nebraska from people whose cable companies shut the pay-per-view off 52 minutes early. Semaphore Entertainment Group sent word to all cable companies of the time change, but some, for whatever reason, a few systems went with the automatic shutoff using the original time frame. People in those systems have to be furious because the automatic shutoff systems were the ones who missed the ending of the last show as well. Emmanuel Yarborough, the 618-pound sumo wrestler who was in UFC 3 and got destroyed by Keith Hackney, captured the World Amateur Sumo Championship on December 17 at Tokyo Sumo Hall. In sumo equivalents, this would be like winning the National Amateur Championship in golf in the US in that it's a major title, but the biggest pros are a level above. He's supposed to appear on Letterman this week, and they are trying to put together a deal to where he announces he'll be in the next UFC on the Letterman show. Negotiations with Royce Gracie about returning have gotten more serious than at any recent time over the past week, but no deal is finalized. 2020 will do a UFC segment in January. They were filming over the weekend. New York Magazine has a story scheduled in January and Esquire Magazine has a story scheduled for March. Bart Valley did an interview in a martial arts magazine knocking Ken Shamrock, saying that he knocked him out and that Shamrock wasn't one of his toughest opponents. As mentioned earlier, that did happen, but it was a worked match. He also said Gracie Jiu-Jitsu couldn't be that good if a guy like Shamrock, who only has 5 years of training, could hold its top practitioner to a draw. WCW has reconsidered the original decision to tape Nitros bi-weekly starting the new year. The belief, at least from WCW, is that Titan is on its last legs, and they want to keep up the full court press, so they'll be going live at least through April. Nitro dates for the new year are January 8th in Charleston, South Carolina, January 15th in Miami, January 22nd in Las Vegas, January 29th in Canton, Ohio, 2/5 in Lakeland, Florida, 2/12 in the Tampa area, 2/19 in Salisbury, Maryland, and 2/26 in Cleveland. Because they aren't going live on Christmas, they taped 2 shows on December 18th in Augusta, Georgia before 8,100 fans, 3,000 paying $17,000. All I know about next week's show is that the Randy Savage-Ric Flair WCW title match ends with Savage beating Flair to keep the title, and both Sting and Lex Luger and several others wind up doing run-ins. In the course of the run-in, Sting helps Savage while Luger goes after Savage to build the heat between them going into the triangle match at Starrcade. Besides Medusa, also in the show open on the live Nitro was William Perry, who lives in the area and basically was brought in just for that reason, although he did get involved in an angle later in the show. It opened with Ric Flair beating Eddie Guerrero with the figure 4 in 7:37, 3 stars. Flair and Arnold Anderson did an interview, which was interrupted by Kevin Sullivan and Jimmy Hart. Sullivan was mad at what Brian Pillman said the previous week about the Dungeon of Doom. Flair said not to worry, but then Anderson got mad at Sullivan and said that if the Dungeon of Doom comes after Pillman, it means they're coming after Flair and Anderson. Craig Pittman came out saying he wanted Bobby Heenan to manage him, but Heenan said he's retired from managing and said he'd refer him to Jimmy Hart. Pittman will end up on next week's show making a deal to be managed by Teddy Long and turn babyface. Lex Luger beat Marcus Bagwell with the torture rack in 3/08, 1 1/4 stars, in a match not as bad as you'd think. Sting then beat Bobby Eaton with the Scorpion in 3:57 in a match not as good as you'd think, 1 star. Main event was a surprisingly good match for the title with Savage vs. Giant. It went 10-27 and at no point in the match did Giant look bad. He pretty well dominated until missing a splash off the top. Savage hit the elbow but Giant kicked out. Giant dropkicked Savage out of the ring. As they fought on the floor, they did a unique spot where Giant tried to suplex Savage on the floor after lifting up the pads, but Savage grabbed the ropes and Giant took the bump himself. Finally in the ring, Giant hit a choke slam but posed rather than covered, then hit the leg drop when Hogan ran in, hitting him with a chair for the title-saving DQ finish, 2.5 stars. Hogan then went wild doing stiff chair shot after shot on the Giant, referees, Doug Dillinger and others. He kept clocking everyone until Steve McMichael and Perry calmed him down. Hogan is doing all the tricks booking these programs, making himself the kick-ass face and getting himself suspended as it appears, so the fans request him back. etc. Hogan was cheered big time in Augusta, because before they went live he made a big deal about how he was born in Augusta, which is true, and he was a hometown boy. Savage and Hogan did the closing interview with Savage, provided he got through everyone else, agreed to give Hogan a title shot. Paul Orndorff is supposed to undergo neck surgery and will no doubt feud with the Horseman when he returns. It appears the deal to bring the Bushwhackers in has fallen through as they were still under contract to Titan. Public Enemy at this point looks to be coming in with the name Public Enemy. They're scheduled to debut on Nitro on January 8th against Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck. Jeeves, the servant for Bobby Eaton and Steve Regal, used to be mascot Wildcat Willie. WCW's press release for Starrcade listed the following examples of detail work: Chris Benoit Liger vs. Jushin Thunder, Utani, no first name, versus Eddie Guerrero, Tenzan without a first name, and Kanemoto also without a first name. Mark Madden was actually fired for a few hours from the WCW hotline this week by Eric Bischoff. It wasn't until late in the day when someone in the office actually listened to the ring, and Bischoff freaked out when Madden pointed out that Hogan was booed in Charlotte and wanted him out. However, Nick Lombros, the company lawyer, said it wouldn't be a good idea legally since everything Madden says has to first be approved of by the company, and he recorded it well ahead of time and nobody bothered to check it out until it was on the books for a day. He was also ordered to never talk about UFC again on the hotline. Nitro on January 1st from the Omni has Flair vs. Hogan on the books, although it may change. Savage vs. Anderson and Harlem Heat vs. Nasty Boys. WWF. Highlights from the Monday Night Raw taping on December 18th in Newark, Delaware. It appears the top singles matches at the Royal Rumble will be Razor Ramon vs. Goldust for the IC title, Jeff Jarrett vs. Ahmed Johnson, and Bret Hart vs. Undertaker, although they may turn it into a triangular match. They really pushed the Goldust/Ramon angle, with Goldust having the hots for Ramon. On a later interview, which may or may not air, Goldust looked at Vince McMahon and said something to the effect of him asking Vince if he had a microphone in his pants, or if he was just glad to see him. Most reports are that the blood in the Hartsmith match was from a blood capsule rather than a blade job. Don't know for sure. There will be no Raw on December 25th. Also at the tapings, for January 1st in what is billed as the Raw Bowl, Smoking Guns and Ramon and Savio Vega beat 1-2-3 Kid and Sid in Yokozuna and Owen Hart. Santa Claus got a squash win managed by Ted DiBiase. Diesel pinned Mabel very quickly. Jarrett beat Hakushi with the figure 4. On the live show, Jarrett beat Fatu via DQ when he injured Fatu's shoulders, and Ahmed Johnson ran in for the save. Buddy Landel was given a win over Bob Holly in a very long and not very good match, although Landel had a lot of fans. Ramon beat Yokozuna via countout in the IC title match when Undertaker came out and Yokozuna ran away. Bret Hart beat Landel with the sharpshooter later in the show. Undertaker pinned Isaac Yankem. Guns kept the tag titles beating Spiders. Owen Hart pinned Marty Jannetty. Ringmaster, Steve Austin, managed by DiBiase, won a squash. Johnson pinned Kid and Bret, and Ramon and Undertaker beat Yokozuna and Sid and Yankem. Vince McMahon was online after the December 11th Raw. He was less of a smartass this time, although many people were complaining that he was dodging all the hard questions. Headhunters will be getting a tryout on the January 22nd Stockton Raw tapings. They may wind up in the Royal Rumble. Several outsiders are expected to be brought in for the Rumble. Terry Funk was among those asked but turned it down. January 26th at Madison Square Garden is Bret vs. Diesel in a cage and Undertaker vs. Yokozuna. That's all for now, wrestling fans. See you next time. Wrestle Machine signing off.